It's also very interesting to look at the work of Bill Cooke. Bill Cooke, formerly of the University of York, prior to the University of Lancaster, also University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, which is the School of Management. This no longer exists. University of Management Science and Technology, the University of Manchester. However, I got one of my master's degrees from the Manchester School of Management, and I personally think of it as one of the better, one of the finer academic research institutes in management theory in the country. But then, because I may be biased, I unfortunately wasn't there at the same time as Bill Cooke, so I wasn't directly taught by him. Anyway, what's interesting about Bill's work, of course, is it challenges directly the two and the most common models of management. The way we look at its development in history, and we'll look at it as an idea that has differed in some ways from the way that we've approached other things in the past. So I think, therefore, one of the things we need to look at in Bill's work is why is this controversial? Why is it challenging? Why is it not being ignored? And there's some very, very practical information that we'll find out about slavery and its role in history. But the first question might be to ask, why history? Why is business and history important to us? Well, we study management history for many, many reasons. Because one of the most important things to know about is that history is as much about the time of writing as the time it writes about. I mean, it's very important to understand this. When people write a history, they are writing about the time that we are interpreting of. They're writing very much about that's relevant to the present. So looking at why people are writing these histories gives us some understanding, some ideas of what management is about. So that's why it's important, one of the reasons it's important to look at it. History is never for itself. It's never isolated. Jenkins talked about it's always written for someone. There's a reason history changes. The reason history develops is the reason why we're constantly talking and arguing about historical approaches. So it's always for someone, it's never for itself. The way it's history, it's written, it requires choices. Like all of things, we decide what is it we're going to look at and what we're going to ignore. And what we look at and what we ignore decided by the existing power relationships, the contemporary competing powers, and the associated ideologies that have been transferred at that time. I mean, one of the interesting things I was to say, look at this and mentioned before, is the idea that Adam Smith would oppose the Adam Smith Institute. Because the history of Adam Smith's writing is not that of a radical right-winger libertarian, just someone who understood the needs of the market, understood how it worked, and understood the importance of regulating it. But the way history is written now, Adam Smith has been co-opted by the most radical libertarian movement. So that's interesting. So the way that history is looked at is important. I think it's important for us therefore to decide why are we looking at this. And slavery was very much ignored in management history for a long, long period. And it's only in the more recent years, Cooke was writing back in the last 20, 25 years, and we've actually started to see and understand how important it was in the development of management and of accounting and other things around that. Because the two basic arguments for a long time that were pushed forward were this Chandler, who was a very strongly pro-US capitalism, who believed that US capitalism was the superior system, and Burl, who was also pro-capitalism, believed capitalism was in decline, was being punished, was falling from a state of grace, very much a liberal imperialist, and supported, but still support the ideas of American US capitalism. So we start off with Chandler. He talks about the emergence of management in 1840s and the railroads. It's the myth of the frontier, the idea of the management person pushing back and developing the models of management, developing the ideas of management, building US capitalism, the brain one, the going out there, the pioneer, doing that. And he sees this as a growth from that, and there's a strong development of US capitalism, and he ignores uncomfortable tales on the way. Burl, although he's very critical of modern US capitalism at the time he's writing, he actually looks back at the same period. He looks backwards in history. There was this great version of capitalism that's a free market when people built their own companies and built their own things going forward. So there's actually a connection between the two. Even though they may appear to be very strongly, we never agree there's a connection, there's a solid connection there between the liberalism of Burl and the more right and fundamental pro-US capitalism of Chandler. And Cooke looks at the history that challenges this directly. Now, what he is saying to us is the growth of US capital is not the heroic manager of the frontier going out there, doing it himself, building a country from scratch, from nothing, and creating this sort of capitalistic, most important, powerful capitalist nation in the world. Yeah? He actually says that, in fact, American capitalism was built on slavery. It was built in a very open way in which the development of the theories of capitalism came from that. And for examples of this, he pulls out some of the writings recent at that. Davies in 1936, writing a very straightforward history, looks at the Bennet Burroughs plantation rules. Bennet Burroughs was a guy who ran a plantation. A plantation might be considered a piece of machinery. To operate successfully, all its parts should be uniform and exact, its impelling force regular and steady. Think of this as the model of the factory. As you see in many of the things which are both pro and anti-capitalist, there's this idea of a single machine working well with human beings as part inside the machine, making it operate. At the time, slave worth in the southern states of America was more than all the other value of capital put together. So all the fields and the factories and the plantations and the farms, etc., put together did not exceed the value of the slaves. So slaveholders could literally claim, our people are our greatest asset, because they were the main value of capital within the system. And these are therefore the startation. This is Southern Cultivator, it's a magazine written for slavers, by slavers, 1854, is starting to talk in terms of management theory. To make the overseer responsible for management of the plantation, he must have control of it, otherwise he cannot be responsible, because no man is nor should be responsible for the acts of the other. A strange thing for someone who's arguing about the ownership of people to say, but you can hear in this modern management theory. They're saying that you must give people responsibility for them. It's almost talking about giving people the right to control their own lives, but of course it's doing so while writing up an entire section of society, people who were not allowed to have their say. Yeah. Also at this time, we're talking about something like teamwork is seen as a modern concept, but actually Chandler talks a lot about teamwork. But he talks about the teamwork of the gang labour, but he doesn't recognise that this is a team that is driven by the whip. And he also looks at this time, when gang labour is talked about, there was actual breaking down of the gang labourers. So they've been given numbers, and the first class hands, the best hands, those who are considered to have good judgment and quick motions, would be working well in the fields. Below those, there was a second of those, the weakest and most inefficient class. And the third, the class of hoe hands. These are the ones who came along at the back working and picking out things. So this is classified, the first class which would have had an open small hole about 7 inches apart. The second class dropped and fortified cotton seed, and the third class follow and cover with a rake. We're breaking this up. What we're looking here, well actually this could be Adam Smith's division of labour, it could be Taylor's philosophy of choosing the right man for job based on physical characteristics. Taylor's scientific management wasn't written until the end of the 20th century, the 19th century, but we're actually already looking here at a description of it which seems to very much play into his hands. And it's something that's actually coming out very much through the world of slavery. Yeah. But actual management theories, up to the times of there's little reference to slavery. It's been completely written out. Where it is noted, it is either considered downplayed as an outlier, or it is considered to be outside the idea of management. And what's interesting is we have three basic schools of management: technical management, elite management, political management, all of which argue this. Argue that actually slavery doesn't belong here. It's a definitely starting to see an appearance of model way of doing things, definitely being pushed forward in this. So it's really important to recognise this. Okay. Slavery is excluded by capitalism. Chandler doesn't ignore slavery, he mentions it. He asserts it is an ancient and peculiar situation. It has no saying, no backing, and nothing to do with that. And his claims of lack of segregation control, he completely ignores it. It's almost like slavery didn't happen. It's completely, it's an ancient regime. And you often see this, people argue that slavery wasn't an important part of capitalism, it was actually feudalist that Hanover said, which is just simply not true. Like I exploited, the major capital of the deep south of the USA was slaves, more than anything else. But one of the interesting things we've seen from some of the quotes before is many of the quotes, the ideas, the arguments of modern management, you can hear the language, modern managerialism, in the way the antebellum plantations were organised. So I think it's really important to recognise that this is a managerial system, and therefore its influence in its saying could not be ignored. It's also interesting to consider in the nature of the fact that actually there is a real accounting purpose here as well. So we can look at some of the early accounting principles and talk about how they accounted for slavery. Okay? Additionally, many modern accounting techniques prevalent with writing of slaves brought a 20 over 10, 15 year depreciation, particularly telling. What's that telling us? Well, that's telling us that a slave bought at 20 was expected to be used up as a machine within 15 years. That's quite a devastating down of it, but it's also a showing of understanding that early depreciation of modern machine using accountancy is very much based on the idea of the life of a slave, because that's how long you were a slave, how long do you get the value of money out of it. And it's extraordinary, some of these writings, to read them, but some of these are extremely uncomfortable, make extremely uncomfortable reading. And they're talking about human beings in this manner. But it's important to look at them and understand their relationship inside the accountancy. And also, of course, there's other words. Slaveholders also developed an equivalence unit called the prime field hand. Certain capabilities, the prime hand is expected production day workers are measured against the standard being valued just half hand and quarter hand. The top are rated, the half rated is rated. Several dimensions of the calculated practice of slave owners advanced ahead of northern merchants and manufacturers, and many record and analyze the productivity of human capital with cruel precision. Accountancy was one of the primary developers that came out of slavery. It understood how to make values, understood how to do depreciation, etc. It understood how to put values onto varying things. It's learning a lot of the modern things about slavery. So I think it's important for us not to ignore this work and to read these papers and take it on board and think what it might tell us about modern management theory. In conclusion, what have I got to say? The history of slavery and the roots of modern management theory suggest a very different approach to capitalism than Chandler's heroic frontier and the success of the management of the empire. It's really telling us there's a different type of development, it's a different form of capitalism and the way it develops than that which we normally see through the work of Chandler and of Burl and of other modern theories. So it cannot be ignored. It's time to bring it in and to see and understand developed on that. But Burl's arguments are challenged as well, because Burl actually talked about the death of capitalism. His idea was historically, if you think about it, that there was some true capitalism in the past. But actually, what period is he looking back to? He's looking back to a period in which there was a lack of true free thinking even for many of the people. So actually, Burl's arguments start to look on very shaky ground indeed, or at least need to be rethought and replaced in historical context. So in the end, the choice is simple. We learn from history or we repeat history. That is why I think it's very important that we do understand some business history in looking elsewhere and course of governance, accountability of the way that businesses are run and the way that we can divide up the profits from any business. Thank you.